Get out! You don't belong here! I'm done. Get out! You don't belong here! I'm done with you!
Please. Unaware his wife had just inherited a $100 million tech dynasty, he kicked her into the rain to move his mistress into their penthouse. What she did when a fleet of black SUVs arrived to pick her up shocked him and left him homeless. He stood in the doorway of their penthouse, the same doorway where he had carried her across the threshold 6 years ago, whispering forever into her ear. But tonight, he used that same doorway to push his wife into the pouring rain with nothing but the clothes on her back and the quiet dignity she refused to surrender. She had been his wife, his partner, the woman who had worked double shifts as a nurse to keep their dreams alive, while he climbed the corporate ladder she had helped him build. But tonight, he looked at her like she was a stranger blocking his view. His mistress watched from behind him, already wearing the silk robe that hung on her side of the closet. What he didn't know, what no one in that gleaming penthouse knew, was that 3 floors below, in a law firm's sealed envelope, a document had just been signed that transferred full controlling ownership of a $100 million tech dynasty to the soaking wet woman now standing on the rain-slick sidewalk with nowhere to go. She had inherited everything. He had just thrown away everything. But here is the question that should stop you cold right now. What kind of woman inherits a $100 million tech dynasty in silence and says absolutely nothing? And when a fleet of black SUVs materializes out of the rain like a convoy built for royalty, pulling up to the curb where he had left her shivering, what does she do? Does she look up at that penthouse window? Does she make a call? Does she smile? And why, by the time those SUV doors close, does the man who kicked her out end up with nothing, not even the penthouse he thought he'd won? Ah, dear viewers, this story is about power, betrayal, and the breathtaking moment when a woman the world underestimated rises to claim everything that was always hers. You will learn that loyalty is an asset, arrogance is a liability, and that the person you discard in your moment of pride can become the very force that redefines your future. Watch until the very end because every scene holds a lesson that could change how you see the people in your own life. Drop in the comments what lesson hit you hardest, and what would you have done differently if you were in her shoes? You found Black Stories, and trust me, you're exactly where you need to be. We tell stories that entertain you, challenge you, and leave you thinking long after it's over. Hit subscribe, stay till the very last second, and let's begin. The penthouse had 32 floors of ambition beneath it. It sat at the crown of Soul Crown Tower, the most coveted address in the city, and on a clear night from the wraparound terrace, you could see the entire skyline laid out like a map of everything a man could want. Yi-1-0 had wanted all of it, the view, the address, the life, and for 6 years it had been his, but only because of the woman he was now pushing out of it. Zara had not always lived like this. There was a version of her that existed only in the memory of people who knew her before Yi-1, a version that wore hospital scrubs at 3 a.m., that ate vending machine sandwiches between 12-hour shifts at Mercy General, that sent half her paycheck to her mother in Cleveland, and the other half into the savings account she was quietly building for a future she believed in. She had been a woman of substance before she was ever a woman of wealth, but Yi-1 had never truly understood the difference between the two. He had met her in the hospital cafeteria, his hospital visit, her break. He had been charming then, disarming, the kind of man who made you feel in the first 10 minutes of knowing him that you were the most interesting person in the room. Zara, who had spent years being underestimated, had found that intoxicating. She had loved him with the kind of loyalty that does not negotiate, does not hide itself, does not come with conditions, but she had made the quiet, costly mistake of assuming he loved her the same way. He did not. What Yi-1-0 loved was what Zara represented. Stability, sacrifice, a soft place to land while he climbed. He had taken her income and called it their income. He had taken her connections and called them his network. He had taken her belief in him and worn it like armor through every boardroom and every setback. And when he finally reached the level he had always believed he deserved, he had looked around at his new world and decided that Zara no longer fit in it. Suah had fit perfectly. She was everything Zara was not because she was better, but because she was newer. Suah was polished in the way that expensive things are polished, with a laugh that arrived on cue and opinions that never pushed back against his. She had walked into Yi-1's orbit 8 months ago at a firm retreat, and he had made his decision about Zara somewhere between the second cocktail and the elevator ride upstairs. Tonight was simply the execution of a decision already made. "I need you out before 9, he had said, not looking up from his phone when Zara walked through the door at 7:40 p.m., still in her coat, still carrying the weight of what she now knew. The inheritance, the attorneys, the black envelope with a gold crest that had rearranged her entire understanding of her own life. She had come home to tell him. Even now, even after everything she suspected, she had come home because she was Zara. And Zara did not run from hard conversations, but the conversation she had prepared for was not the one waiting for her. Suah was already there, not waiting outside, not sitting in the lobby, already there in the bedroom in Zara's robe, with her luggage stacked in the hallway, like she had already measured the space and decided where everything would go. The sight of it hit Zara the way cold water hits. Fast, total, breathtaking, but she did not cry. She stood very still in the entryway and looked at her husband, and what she felt beneath the shock and the grief and the 6 years of love being handed back to her, without apology, was something that surprised even her. Clarity. "I need you out before 9, he said again, this time looking up, this time meeting her eyes with the particular cruelty of a man who has rehearsed his indifference. She looked at him for a long moment, then she picked up the single bag she had instinctively packed 3 days ago. When she had first felt this coming, the way you feel a storm before it arrives, and she walked to the door. He didn't help her, he didn't speak, he simply watched, and when she crossed the threshold into the hallway, he closed the door behind her with a click that echoed like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the rain had already started. Zara stood at the elevator, her bag at her feet, her coat darkening at the shoulders, but her chin was level, her breathing was steady, and somewhere in the quiet center of her, something that had been sleeping for a very long time had just opened its eyes. She did not know yet that downstairs, 6 black SUVs had just turned onto Gangnam Avenue. Yiwon just closed the door on 6 years of loyalty, but Zara walked out carrying a secret worth $100 million. The fleet is already moving, and in Scene 2, you will discover exactly what Zara was doing for those 3 missing days, and why the man who dismissed her Uncle Marcus as eccentric and irrelevant is about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. 3 days earlier, Zara had received the black envelope. She had been sitting in the break room at Mercy General, still working her shifts, still showing up, still being the woman she had always been, even as her marriage quietly bled out around her, when the private courier appeared at the nurse's station asking for her by full legal name. Not Mrs. O, not Yiwon's wife, her name. Zara Ann Prescott O, the name she had been born with, the name that, as of 72 hours ago, meant something the rest of the world had not yet been told. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside it was a letter, handwritten on cream stationery in the careful, deliberate cursive of a man who chose every word like it cost him something. Because it did. It was from her uncle, Marcus. But not the Marcus that Yiwon had spent 6 years dismissing across dinner tables and holiday gatherings. Not the eccentric, quietly dressed man who drove a 10-year-old sedan and asked uncomfortable questions about corporate ethics at Thanksgiving. That Marcus had been a performance, a deliberate, sustained, masterfully executed performance, built to protect himself from exactly the kind of people who would have circled him like sharks the moment they smelled the water. The real Marcus had built Marcus Digital Systems from a single patent in a rented garage in 1987. By 2003, it was the backbone infrastructure of half the internet's data routing architecture. By 2015, its subsidiary companies touched aerospace, biotech, clean energy, and artificial intelligence. By the time Marcus died quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning, 11 days ago, his estate had been independently valued at $100 million. And every cent of it, every share, every subsidiary, every patent, every building, every board seat had been left in a single, airtight, irrevocable trust to his niece, Zara, because Marcus had watched. That was what the letter explained, slowly, carefully, in the voice of a man who had loved her from a distance, with the precision of someone who understood that love, real love, sometimes looks like patience. He had watched her work double shifts. He had watched her carry Yiwon's ambitions on her back without complaint. He had watched her shrink herself year by year, just to fit inside a life that was too small for who she actually was. And he had made his decision long before he made his will. You were always the one he had written. You were always the one who understood that what you build matters less than how you build it and who you protect while you do. Zara had read the letter 3 times in the break room. Then she had folded it, placed it in her bag, finished her shift, and called the number on the attorney's card enclosed. The next 3 days had been unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had sat across from a team of 12 attorneys in a glass-walled boardroom on the 47th floor of a building she now technically owned. While they walked her through the architecture of an empire she had never known existed, she had signed her name onto documents that transferred controlling interest of Marcus Digital Systems and all its subsidiaries into her hands. She had met her uncle's executive team, serious, accomplished people who had been briefed on her identity weeks before Marcus's passing, and who looked at her, she noticed, not with skepticism, but with a particular relief of people who had been waiting for steady hands. She had not told Yiwon, not because she was planning revenge. That was important to understand about Zara. Revenge required a kind of sustained anger she had never been built for. She had not told him because she had come home that evening genuinely intending to, and he had answered her arrival with an eviction. But here was what Yiwon had never understood about the woman he married, the very thing that Marcus had seen from the very beginning. Zara did not make decisions in the heat of a moment. She never had. Every major choice of her life had been made in the quiet, in the still, in the space after the storm, where most people were still shaking, and she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. She was thinking now. Standing at the elevator with rain on her shoulders, and 6 years of marriage reduced to a single click of a closing door, Zara reached into her coat pocket and touched the phone she had not yet used, the one the attorneys had given her, the one preloaded with a single contact labeled only, "When you're ready." Her thumb hovered over it. Below, on Gangnam Avenue, the first of the black SUVs had already parked. The second was pulling in behind it, and by the time Zara stepped out of the lobby into the rain, all 6 were there. Engines running, tinted windows dark, a line of quiet power stretching half a block in both directions. The lead driver stepped out first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that had not come off any rack, and he walked toward her with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been trained to project calm in the presence of importance. He stopped 2 feet from her, looked at her directly. "Ms. Prescott O," he said. Prescott first, O second, and something about that order landed in Zara's chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. "The board sends their regards. We're here whenever you're ready." Zara looked at him for a long moment, then she looked up, slowly, deliberately, at the penthouse window, 32 floors above, where a light had just clicked on behind the glass. He was watching. She could not see his face from where she stood, but she knew the shape of him in a window. 6 years of knowing someone leaves marks like that, even after everything. But what she felt looking up at that lit rectangle of glass was not grief anymore. It was not anger. It was something cleaner and quieter and far more permanent than either. It was decision. She looked back at the driver. "Give me 1 moment," she said quietly, and she reached into her coat and made a single phone call. Not to Yiwon, not to a friend, not to her mother in Cleveland. She called the lead attorney, and in 45 seconds she gave 3 instructions that would, by morning, remove Yiwon O's name from every document, every account and every asset he had spent 6 years believing was his. The penthouse, the car, the investment portfolio built entirely from her inheritance advance. All of it, gone, legal, irreversible. She ended the call, dropped the phone back into her pocket, and walked toward the open SUV door with the steady, unhurried grace of a woman who had just stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who she was. Zara just made 3 phone calls that Yiwon doesn't know about yet, but he's about to find out. In scene 3, Yiwon comes downstairs looking for a fight he thinks he's already won, and walks directly into the most humiliating, clarifying, and irreversible moment of his life. And Suah. What Suah does, when she discovers the truth about the woman she replaced, will leave you absolutely speechless. Yiwon O had always been a man who trusted his own instincts. It was the thing he told himself most often, in boardrooms, in mirrors, in the quiet moments between one ambition and the next, that his greatest asset was his ability to read a situation faster than everyone else in the room. He prided himself on it, built his entire professional identity around it, told the story of it at dinner parties while Zara sat beside him, smiling at a version of him she had long since stopped recognizing. But instinct, it turns out, is only as good as the information feeding it. And Yi Won-oh had spent 6 years systematically ignoring the most important information in his life. He had seen the SUVs from the window, all 6 of them lined up on Gangnam Avenue like a motorcade waiting for someone whose name moved things. His first thought had been that it was nothing to do with him, a celebrity in the building, a politician passing through. His second thought, arriving 3 seconds later with the particular unease of a man whose conscience is not entirely clean, was that it had something to do with Zara. He watched her walk toward the lead vehicle. He watched the driver speak to her first, to her not to anyone else, as though she were the person everyone in that convoy had been dispatched to collect. He watched her reach into her pocket, make a call, and stand in the rain with a stillness that he recognized, suddenly and uncomfortably, as the stillness she wore when she had already made up her mind about something. He was downstairs in 4 minutes. He had not told Sua where he was going, just grabbed his jacket, taken the private elevator and crossed the lobby with the long stride of a man who had convinced himself he was still in control of a situation that had already moved 3 steps beyond him. The doorman, Gerald, a man who had greeted Zara by name every single morning for 4 years, and who had watched tonight's events from behind his desk with the careful neutrality of someone paid to observe and not comment, held the door open without a word. Yi Won stepped out into the rain. Zara was standing at the open door of the lead SUV, speaking quietly to a woman in a charcoal blazer who had emerged from the second vehicle. An executive, clearly, someone whose posture announced importance the way expensive things announce themselves without trying. They were looking at a tablet together. Zara was nodding. She had not yet gotten in. Zara, his voice came out sharper than he intended, but he did not soften it. She turned, and here was the thing that stopped him, not her expression, which was composed and level and gave him absolutely nothing to work with. But the way the people around her moved when she turned, the driver straightened almost imperceptibly. The executive with the tablet took a half step back, creating space but not retreating. The specific body language of someone deferring to the most important person present, to Zara. Yi Won, she said simply. The way you say the name of something you have already finished grieving. What is this? He gestured at the convoy, at the suits, at the quiet machinery of power assembled on the street, where he had expected to find his wife standing alone in the rain, diminished and desperate. What's going on? Zara looked at him for a moment with an expression he had never seen on her face in 6 years of marriage. Not anger, not hurt, not the pleading softness he had learned to use against her. It was something altogether different. It was the look of a woman regarding a situation she had already solved. You should go back upstairs, Yi Won, she said quietly. There are some calls coming through tonight that are going to need your attention. He did not understand what that meant, not yet. He understood it 40 seconds later when his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen, his bank. He frowned, declined it, looked back at Zara. It buzzed again immediately, his investment broker, then his attorney. Then a number he didn't recognize, but whose area code belonged to the firm that managed the penthouse's ownership documentation. All of them at once on a rainy Thursday evening. His face changed. It changed the way faces change when the ground shifts beneath them. Not all at once, but in a slow, terrible sequence. Understanding arriving in pieces, each one worse than the last. He looked at his phone, he looked at Zara, he looked at the convoy, he looked at Zara again, and this time he was actually seeing her. Perhaps for the first time in years, but it was the specific tragedy of this moment that seeing her clearly now cost him everything it would have saved him 6 years ago. Zara, his voice had lost its edge. Something else had replaced it. Something that sounded almost like the man she had married. What did you do? I didn't do anything tonight, Yi Won, she said, and her voice was not cruel. That was the part that would stay with him longest, that she was not cruel about it, that she delivered the truth the way her Uncle Marcus had always delivered hard things, with steadiness and without theater. Everything that's happening right now is the result of choices that were already made. Yours and mine. She paused. The penthouse is in my name. It was always in my name. You'll find that in the documents your attorney is calling about right now. The joint accounts have been separated as of this evening. Your personal account remains untouched. She said it cleanly, with the precision of someone who has thought this through, not in anger, but in the cold, clear light of absolute certainty. You have 30 days. He stared at her. The rain was soaking through his jacket now, and he hadn't noticed because the rain was the least of what was happening to him on the sidewalk. 30 days for what, he asked, though somewhere beneath the shock he already knew. To find somewhere else to live, she said simply. And then, because she was Zara, because even now, even here, she was the woman Marcus had always known her to be, she said one more thing, not as a wound, not as a weapon, as a truth she had carried alone for long enough. I came home tonight to tell you about the inheritance, Yi-won. I came home to share it with you. She let that land, let him feel the full weight of what that meant, what he had been offered, what he had turned away at the door. But you'd already made your choice. I'm just making mine. She turned back to the SUV. It was at precisely this moment that the lobby doors behind Yi-won opened, and Soo-ah stepped out, still in Zara's silk robe, having apparently decided that whatever was happening on the street below required her presence and her authority. She stepped out barefoot onto the wet sidewalk, looked at the convoy, looked at Zara, looked at Yi-won's face, and read with the particular animal intelligence of someone who had always been very good at knowing when a situation had turned, that something had gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Yi-won, she started, but Yi-won was not looking at her. He was looking at Zara's back as she folded herself gracefully into the backseat of the lead SUV, and he was doing the math. The terrible, humiliating, and irrefutable math of a man counting the cost of every arrogant decision he had ever made about the woman he had just lost. The driver closed the door. The convoy's engines deepened almost imperceptibly, a low and powerful sound, the sound of something important preparing to move. Soo-ah touched Yi-won's arm. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, standing barefoot in the rain outside a building he no longer owned, wearing a jacket soaked through with 4 phones ringing simultaneously in his pocket, Yi-won saw Soo-ah with the same devastating clarity with which he should have seen Zara years ago. She was not Zara. She had never been Zara, and Zara, he understood now, too late, always too late, had never been replaceable. The lead SUV pulled forward. Yi-won is standing in the rain with nothing, no penthouse, no accounts, no ground beneath him, and Soo-ah is already doing the math on a man who just lost everything. But scene 4 is where the real story lives, because what Zara does next has nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with the $100 million lesson that will define the rest of her life, Yi-won's life, and the one choice she makes that no one, not the attorneys, not the board, not even her uncle, saw coming. The SUV was warm. That was the first thing Zara noticed, the specific enveloping warmth of a vehicle that had been prepared for someone expected, someone whose comfort had been considered before they arrived. There was water on the console, still not sparkling, because someone had noted in the detailed briefing file the executive team had prepared on her that she preferred still water. There was a folded cashmere blanket on the seat beside her, soft lighting, silence, but not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that had been deliberately created, a pocket of calm inside a world that was about to become very loud around her name. She sat back and closed her eyes for exactly 30 seconds, not to rest, not to celebrate, but because Zara had learned in 38 years of being underestimated and overlooked and quietly carrying more than her share, that the most important thing a person can do at the moment of their greatest power is to pause long enough to remember who they actually are. She knew who she was. She was Marcus's niece, the girl he had taken to science museums on Saturdays when she was 7, the teenager he had sat with at kitchen tables teaching her to read balance sheets the way other uncles taught card games, the young woman he had watched choose integrity over and over again in a world that kept offering her shortcuts. She was the nurse who had held the hands of strangers at 3 a.m. because no one should be alone in their hardest moments. She was the woman who had come home tonight in the rain, who had wanted to share $100 million with a man who had given her 11 minutes to leave. That last part still hurt. She allowed it to hurt because she was honest enough with herself to know that the absence of cruelty is not the absence of pain, and that choosing dignity over destruction does not mean pretending the wound isn't there. It was there. It would be there for a long time, but it would not be the thing that drove her because Zara had watched too many people hand the wheel of their lives to their worst moments and spend decades going in directions they never actually chose. She opened her eyes. The executive beside her, a woman named Renee, Marcus's longest-serving chief of staff, who had known Zara was coming long before Zara knew it herself, was watching her with the patient attention of someone who had worked for a visionary long enough to recognize the particular quality of silence that precedes a significant decision. "Renee," Zara said quietly. "Yes, Miss Prescott. Oh, the Mercy General Foundation grant proposal, the one the hospital board submitted 18 months ago for the new cardiac wing. It was declined for funding." It was not a question. Zara had sat on that grant committee meeting herself, had watched the proposal rejected for lack of a lead donor, had driven home afterward feeling the specific helplessness of someone who can see exactly what needs to be done and lacks only the resources to do it. She did not lack resources anymore. "I want it funded," she said, "full amount. Anonymous donor, I want construction to begin within 60 days. Renee made a note without blinking. Done. And the nursing scholarship program, Marcus's foundation had a draft proposal for it that never launched. "I want it launched, fully endowed, 50 recipients per year, full ride named for Marcus." She paused. He would have hated having his name on it, which is exactly why it should be his name. Something moved across Renee's face. Not surprise, but recognition. The particular recognition of someone watching a person step fully and naturally into a role that was always theirs. "Done," Renee said again. And this time her voice carried something additional, something that sounded like relief. 32 floors above Gangnam Avenue, Yi-1-oh sat on the edge of what had been his bed. But was not, had never been, his bed, with 4 missed calls on his phone, and a certified letter that had apparently been waiting with the building's front desk for 72 hours, delivered by a law firm he didn't recognize, containing documentation that rearranged every assumption he had built his life upon. The penthouse had been purchased in Zara's name, not jointly, not in both names, hers, because 6 years ago when they were closing on this apartment and Yi-1 had been between positions, and the mortgage required a primary borrower with verifiable income, Zara had signed every document while Yi-1 stood beside her, telling her which unit he preferred. He had never read the paperwork. He had never needed to, because Zara handled things. Zara always handled things, and he had confused her competence for compliance so completely, and for so long that he had forgotten they were different qualities entirely. The investment portfolio, the one he had been mentally cataloging all evening as his safety net, his exit strategy, his proof that he would land on his feet, had been built from an inheritance advance Marcus had quietly arranged for Zara 3 years ago, rooted through a separate account in her name that Yi-1 had known about in the vague, incurious way that he knew about most things Zara managed. His name was not on it. His name, he was discovering with the systematic devastation of a man reading the fine print of his own life for the very first time, was not on very much at all. When Sua appeared in the bedroom doorway, she was dressed now, her own clothes, not Zara's robe, which she had folded and placed on the chair with a care that suggested she had already begun to understand the gravity of what she had stepped into. She looked at him, he looked at her, and in the silence between them lived the full, uncomfortable truth that neither of them had the generosity left to avoid. She was the one holding all of this together, Sua said. It was not a question either. Yi-1 said nothing because there was nothing to say that the certified letter, the missed calls, and the empty side of the closet had not already said more clearly and more permanently than he ever could. 3 weeks later, Zara stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Mercy General Cardiac Wing. She wore no jewelry. No designer label announced itself on her coat. She stood with a hard hat slightly too large for her head, and a shovel she wielded with genuine enthusiasm. And when the photographer from the city paper asked her to look up for the shot, she laughed. A real laugh, unperformed and unguarded because the hat kept slipping. Marcus would have loved this, she thought. He would have stood exactly where she was standing in a too large hat laughing at himself, and afterward, he would have found the most junior person on the project team and asked them what they thought could be done better, because that was how he had always operated, with curiosity instead of authority, with questions instead of declarations, with the radical and revolutionary humility of someone who understood that power is not a destination, but a responsibility. She understood that now in her bones, not because the money had taught her, she had understood it long before the money, but because the money had given her the scale to act on what she had always known, and that she was beginning to realize was what Marcus had always been waiting to see, not whether she could handle wealth, but whether she already had the character that wealth in the right hands could amplify into something that actually mattered. She did. She always had. Yi-1-oh moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a building with no doorman and no view, and he spent a long time, longer than he would ever admit to anyone, thinking about a woman standing in the rain with a single bag and the quiet dignity she refused to surrender. He thought about the doorway, he thought about forever, he thought about 11 minutes. And in the particular unforgiving silence of a life, stripped of everything he had taken for granted, Yi-1-oh finally learned the lesson that Zara had lived her entire life, that the most valuable things are rarely the loudest ones, that loyalty is not weakness but architecture, and that the person you dismiss in your moment of greatest arrogance is often the very foundation you have been standing on all along. By the time he understood it fully, she was already building something extraordinary without him. Dear viewers, Zara never raised her voice. She never made a scene. She never asked for revenge, but life with breathtaking precision gave her something far more powerful than revenge. It gave her clarity, it gave her purpose, and it gave her the chance to turn the most painful night of her life into the foundation of something that would outlast every person who ever underestimated her. This story teaches us 4 things that are worth carrying with you long after this video ends. First, the way you treat people in their quiet season is a direct reflection of your character, not theirs. Yi-1 didn't lose Zara the night he kicked her out. He lost her the moment he stopped seeing her. Second, loyalty is not weakness. Zara's consistency, her sacrifice, her willingness to keep showing up even when she was unseen, that was not naivety. That was the kind of strength that compounds interest over time and pays out in ways that arrogance never anticipates. Third, power in the hands of a person with genuine character does not become a weapon. It becomes a tool for building. Zara's first instinct with $100 million was not to destroy Yi-1. It was to fund a cardiac wing, endow a scholarship, and honor the uncle who believed in her. That is the kind of person worth becoming. And fourth, the rain doesn't break the right people. Sometimes it just washes away everything that was never meant to stay. Drop in the comments below what lesson from this story hit you hardest. And if you were Zara standing in that rain with $100 million and a closed door behind you, what would you have done differently? If this story moved you, educated you, or made you think about your own life in a new way, subscribe right now because this is exactly what we do here. Every single story is built to entertain you, challenge you, and leave you with something real to carry forward. Zara walked into the rain as a wife who had been discarded. She came back as something no one, least of all Yi-1, ever saw coming. And that, dear viewers, is the whole lesson.